Let's take a look at this example. So in here we have the age and we have to check whether the status is adult or minor. Now in case I want to change the age and check the status again, what I need to do is update the age and execute this line of code again. And for another age, I can do the same and you can see the result. But can you spot any problem here? One issue that you might notice is with this line. So we have to repeat this every time. What if you could write one block of code like this one and then reuse it as many times as you want with different results obviously every time, and that is a function. And today we are crossing over from primitive types into our first non-primitive data type, and that is function. Previously we talked about primitive data types and those could only store just one value, and non-primitive data types, also called reference types, are different. Instead of holding one simple value, there are containers that can hold multiple values, behavior, or both of them. So we have several non-primitive data types, but as a beginner we should be focused on just three of them: functions, objects, and arrays. And today we start with the one you will use in literally every JavaScript program, the functions. So what is a function? A function is a reusable block of code that performs a task. Instead of writing the same logic over and over again, you write it once, give it a name, and run it whenever you need it. So I'm back in console and here we can see the issue. We are repeating the same line, so we need to make our code reusable and readable at the same time. So for that we can use functions. Functions are basically some code written inside a block and have a name for that block. In order to create a function, the syntax we use is we start with the keyword function and then the name of the function we want to give. So in our case we are getting the status, so we are going to name this function as get status. And then we have the open and close parentheses, and we write the block inside the curly braces. So what I'm going to do now is I'm going to copy this line and paste it here. Remember in the previous videos we talked about function scope. This is a block of a function, and whatever declared inside a function is called a function scope. So we have already defined the status at the top outside this function, so we can access it inside the function as well. So what I'm going to do is just set the status based off the age. Right now we have the age available outside of the function as well, so we can change the age and get the status. So if I press enter, and now let's say I change the age to 5, and now I simply call our function. And in order to invoke or call a function, we write the name of the function and add open and close parentheses. So if I hit enter, the function is executed, but it is not returning anything. And what does return mean? We will talk about it in a minute. But if I print the value of status now, you can see it has changed to minor. So that means our function is working. So this is one way we can resolve the problem of repetitive statements. Let's improve this further. So what we want is basically the age should be dynamic. Like it would be better, instead of writing the age manually, we could pass the age to this function and the age stays dynamic. So how we can do that is using something called paramters. And for that, what I'm going to do is I'm going to copy this one, and I've cleared my console. So let's first define our status variable, and then what I'm going to do is write our function. And this time I'm going to pass in a value to this function whenever it is called. And for that to be received by the function, we have to write it here between the parentheses. So now whenever I call get status, I can pass in age whatever I want to. So let's add 10. And now if I print status, I can see the result minor. Now one more time, if I change the value to 20 and print status, you can see adult. So we have improved our statements a lot. And now actually let's talk about this whole code that we have written. And there are three parts that makes up a function. The first part is called the name. So in our case, that is get status. The second part is the parameters. The parameters are basically something that we pass whenever we are going to call the function. And the third one is the body. So the body is basically these curly braces, whatever is written inside them. Let's go a little deeper and understand a few key terms about functions. And I want to talk about parameters, arguments, and the default value. So a parameter is basically the placeholder name in the function definition. So in our example, the age that we define between the parentheses is a parameter, a placeholder for actual value that we will pass. An argument, on the other hand, is the actual value that we pass when we are calling a function. So basically this 10 and this 20 is the argument that we are passing. Now there is one more option that we have, and that is the default value. So in case we don't pass in the age, we can set the default value of age. And in order to do that, I'm going to copy this function and clear the console. Now let me redefine the status because I cleared the console and refreshed the screen. I'm gonna redeclare this one, and what we can do is set the default value of age. So let's say we set 0. And this 0 is going to be only used when we call the function and don't pass in age. So if I hit enter, call the method, and if I don't pass in any value and press enter, it still works. It is going to use the value of age as 0. So if I print status, it says minor. Now let's try it with one more time, but this time age is equal to 20. So I'm gonna call get status, print the status value, and this time you can see it is adult because we have set the default value of age as 20. Okay, so now let's talk about return values. Sometimes we need to get back values from a function in order to use it further. For that, we can return values instead of nothing from a function. And in order to return something from the function, we can use the keyword return. So what I'm gonna do is I'm just gonna copy the function, and this time we are not going to use the status variable at all. So I'm gonna refresh the page. I'm gonna write the function. And this time, instead of storing the value into status variable, what we are going to do is return. And what it is going to return is basically the result of this ternary operation. Now I press enter and let's call get status. And you can see we are getting back adult. Previously we were returning nothing, so in case we are not returning anything from a function, we would get undefined. So you can see we have reduced our code a lot. And now we are at a point where I need to show you 3 different ways how we can write a function. So this is one classical way of writing a function where we would use the function keyword, the name of the function, the parentheses, and the block or the function body. And this is called function declaration. This is the classic style. Another way to write a function is using function expression. Basically a function stored in a variable. Let's create a function using expression. It is similar to how we define or declare our variables. So we will use a const, and let's name our function status function. So I'm going to copy the previous function that we wrote and paste it here. The only difference this time is we won't have the name. We don't actually need the name here. Instead, we just define the function, and whenever we have to call this function, we will use this variable name. Now if I call the status function, you can see we still see the same result. So this is the second approach of how we can write function. There is a modern way to write function as well, and that is called arrow function, which is a shorter and a modern syntax. For now, we will only talk about how we can write our function using arrow function, and we will talk about in detail later on. So the syntax of arrow function is const, the name of the function, and this time we are not going to write the function keyword. Instead, what we are going to write is parentheses arrow, that's why it is called arrow function, and then the body of our function. Rest of the thing stays the same. So let's add our parameter and our return statement as well. So this is how you can write the arrow function. So if I hit enter and call this status function, we can still get the same value. Now if our arrow function is pretty simple and it is going to return the statement, then we can write this even shorter. So I'm going to copy this code, paste it, and I'm going to name this function as status func2. And instead of writing manually the return and the curly braces, what we can do is simply write the condition here. And now if I call status func2, we still get back the result. So these are different ways you can write a function. All these ways do the exact same job. Arrow functions are extremely common in modern JavaScript because how they compact they are, especially when a function is short and simple. Now functions are also values, not just a feature. In JavaScript, functions can be treated like any other value. We can store a function in a variable like we just did above in our previous example. We can also pass a function into another function as an argument. And we can return a function from another function as well. So this might feel a little bit complicated. Let's look into an example. Now I'm going to define 2 functions. So say by and a run function. And whenever we are going to call the run function, it is just going to call the function that is sent as an argument. So for example, when I say run, and I would pass in my other function, say by. And when we are passing in the argument, don't write the parentheses because this is going to execute that function, and a return value from this say by function will be passed as the argument. So make sure you are passing in the function. Now if I hit enter, you can see it prints goodbye. So this is a good example of what we just learned. We can pass function as an argument to another function. Now there is a simple term that we use for this. Functions you pass into other functions are called callbacks. And you will see this term constantly when you are working with JavaScript. And a callback is a very important concept in JavaScript. For now, this is enough for the functions, and let's talk about other two non-primitive data types which you will use the most in every program you write: object and arrays.